as I mentioned, if you're coming in, welcome. Send an email to Chris.Becker at ArtCenter, and I will teach you over the assets for the workshop. I'm sure most of you have done that, but if you haven't done that yet, I was just recording for posterity's sake. And let's get back to the mail here. Make a copy of these into your draft folder.
Well, I come by in the afternoon.
Welcome everyone. Happy Saturday. Nice to see you. Okay. Oh, no, pull my email back up. Here. Chris.Becker at ArtCenter, and I'll teach you over these assets. As I was mentioning before, I will be sending you two assets. There's a starter kit. Make a copy of this, duplicate the file. The lecture slides will be up here, but you're welcome to copy those as well, follow them around on your own computers. And let's make sure everybody's got their assets. Okay.
And I'll send you one from that.
Yeah, we'll start. Yeah, right at 3:20. That's fine. That's totally great. We get some stragglers. It's not too complicated. Straggler. Okay, as I was mentioning, shoot me an email. I'll send over the assets. You have a friend next to you. You can find them. I'm the one sharing. And then we'll get started. Airdrop it, paper. Tell me. I'll look at that flow a bit more. Okay. Yep. Say 20. As I said, make a copy of especially the ArtCenter starter file. That's what we'll be using mostly for the output. And we can get going. everyone? Everyone have access? Welcome, everyone. Saturday. I appreciate you all coming to this workshop. We're happy to nerd out and like work on some of this stuff. Some of the stuff that we're going to be talking today is a little bit, it can be a little technical, but fundamentally it's about speeding up your process, letting you control the systems that you want to make. And ultimately it's somewhat software heavy, but to be good at software, you got to spend time in the software. There are opportunities today to sort of practice with this stuff. There's some real practice that we're going to be doing. I can sort of share what that's going to equal, but we'll get going. Just so I get a sense of your guys' experience with design systems generally, how many of you use style in Figma? Yes, so. How many of you like have played around with variables? Okay. We're going to spend a little bit more time on variables. Variables are an important aspect of what we're going to be learning to do in this workshop, to some extent. And it's a way which you generally understand the systems you're architecting, but also if you work with them more deeply, you can work with developers and with artificial intelligence a lot smoother. So there's sort of opportunities there. I am Chris Becker. I teach here in I teach BXC1 and also web technology classes. Some of you have taken my classes before, so some of you, thank you for coming. A little bit of overview of the workshop. Essentially, we're just going to do a quick thing. We're talking a little bit about UI design generally, how advanced variables and color systems are really helpful in component mode, and scaling your systems to be more useful and output. I am not here to yell at you the whole time. If you have a question, put your hand up. It's not silent. We're also here if you're new and you don't know that much, and you see somebody more experts, help your neighbors, right? So you're going to work on very similar things, you work together, ask questions. The thing that's quite frustrating about Figma is that, and generally design, is that you can do it a number of different ways, and there is no one perfect way to do it. I will show you a way that's generally in the realm of trying to build better systems. But it's still a set of language. Like we're going to label things a certain way. We're going to talk about them in the output to do that. And that's we'll talk about primitives, variables, color as hues, semantic variables, and then semantic color modes. And that's generally what we're going to do. We're going to practice a little bit, building out a card that we can move between screens that changes as the page goes. Does that make sense? Good. As I said, I'm Chris Becker. I teach here, I write stuff, I have a book. I generally have to learn systems all the time anyway, because that's my job. I'm a practicing product designer. I also teach here and at ArtCenter College. And I generally nerd out on this stuff. So you're curious.
I just interject there, designer. These are always part of the context of things, the graph that is continuing as need to know. And just for that you now sacrifice your staff or spend some extra time going over the basics. So take advantage of the knowledge today, ask some questions, and make this all worth your while. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's super fun. As I said, I worked on a number of projects at Apple, most recently on stuff for Design Lab and LA for Business. And most of the work that we do generally out in the world is borderline is design system related, like whether you're consuming a design system or others have built help so for you, or you are implementing a design system for what you're building, mostly in the realm of software. And this is becoming more and more relevant as more and more systems are coming online for speeding up and helping you scale your systems. The idea of like, you have to have a team of designers to build a product is no longer the world. We sort of knew that before. People coming out of this school were sort of capable of doing that kind of work, and that becomes sort of a not stress. I went to school here. I have a master's degree in media design program, so there's no like what if it went on Saturday? I got all the rest of it. And I was just doing benefits. Realm of that. So as I said, it's split into 3 parts. We're going to talk a little bit about UI design. We're going to talk about design systems and variables, and then we're going to go practice building this stuff with the starter file that I gave you. That'll be broken into 3 chunks. You probably all know this. The way in which the user interface implements itself is a lot of things, but essentially it's this combination of user needs, business goals, and technical constraints, and then that translates into a user interface because you know what you're solving, right? Now we're going to be solving lots of things, but it's fundamentally systems related, and the opportunity to sort of translate what your user needs down to a granular component of like the color or the sizing or the spacing. It's like what designers usually give a shit about, right? Like we are the pixel, like we have to care about it, and if somebody doesn't like us, it looks terrible in the world. You ever like see a product and you're like, who made this? Why did they allow this into the world? You're like, oh, that's right. No human that cared about this touched it at any point in it. And that's why that's the value of change. Now, this stuff is iterative. These systems never change. The stuff that I'm going to be showing you today in variables has only existed in Figma for under 9 months. So there's also this like, oh, our systems are rapidly changing because of this. The concepts have existed for a long time, especially within HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but the role of it inside of our software tools like Figma are relatively new, but if implemented effectively, can be quite useful. Any of you read recent books and so have this book in the library? Not clean. I highly recommend picking up this book. I think every designer should have it in their design library. But we design technical advances in the world of complex ways. But sometimes the complexities we encounter are a result of the technologies themselves. Most of us are going to be dealing with a set of software suites that are quite complex. Somewhat by design, right? There's a design team, there's people that are there, but it's because the systems that we're actually having to implement are complex themselves. So if we can understand how they all work together, that has larger implications maybe implementing that with larger teams. So are any of you familiar with the atomic design process? The atomic design. Okay, so this is I didn't invent this stuff. Atomic design is actually from the guy Brad Frost, who wrote a book called Atomic Design. Mostly on the front end engineering side. He's also sort of heavily involved in writing and implementing a lot of design system stuff. But the role of this is that we essentially have things that we should consider that scale together to build stuff. So if you know the ions, the design tokens, like what is the bit involved, the little pieces, those can then be combined into components, which can be scaled into patterns, which can be scaled into pages, which can then be the system that you're designing. And the role of organizing and structuring that stuff is actually about simplifying how much stuff we as designers have to touch or have to change in order to make it. Right? A lot of it will sort of field maintenance. Oh, why don't we set up all this stuff? There's like a lot of things to touch. But you do it once and you do it effectively, and then it actually has scalability with the stuff. Now, the role of this also can break into how you sort of conceptualize. Well, what am I dealing with? I'm working on a color, or color it can be used in lots of different ways in your interface in a meaningful way. And there's ways in which you can use that effectively, or even call that thing effective, right? The button color, or this is what we'll talk about in semantic relationships. So lots of here, you can read this guy's book and see some of his stuff. But this is all sort of largely evolved in a design process, right? How we think about design and create is also connected to a larger system of gathering what the goals of the system are, knowing what your component is going to do, crafting wireframes if you start there, developing a sort of visual design language. You're all designers to some extent. This shouldn't be relatively new, but it actually has different implications of how it translates or becomes implementable down at the making stage, right? We want to make stuff fast because it actually helps us iterate more, right? And the role of iteration is actually what makes our systems best, right? Like, as you've probably all experienced that, like, oh, I don't have time, I've had this build with a thing, it's like rock. And then your wise instructor was like, that looks like shit. Like, yeah, no, it just didn't get to it. Right? I didn't know, it didn't get the rounds of polish that it was needed, right? If you work at some of this level, this will start to solve some of that polish stuff. Or you know that you can polish at this level and it actually cascades to the rest of it. Now, web wireframes obviously build a logic of this, but the logic is there to sort of scale up and then design that I need to build out web pages or build out systems that are scalable, down at the component level, but ramp together to solve the problems that we're trying to solve. Now, we're going to work on a card-based system today, which is pretty straightforward, but cards can be both very, very simple and then also be made more complex by considering what they need to do. Right? Now, this is where design systems help with our fidelity, right? We facilitate a higher level of thinking on what we're designing by defining what is, right? And sometimes that is abstractive, right? We know about typography, so we call things H1, H2, H3. Like that language is because we use what is the H1, H2, H3 reference? What? Headline, which has been codified into code for what purpose? It's a system, right? We call it a certain thing. The headline comes from the newspaper. The newspaper then translates into HTML. HTML was a markdown language for writing structure of a web page, right? And so those systems, we didn't invent, somebody invented them. We codify them, a typographer get involved and say, oh, I can actually customize the H1, H2, and 3. I don't have to use the baseline of what HTML supplies in H1. That's where CSS gets involved and the other things that are sort of aligned to that. Does that make sense? How many of you have taken like a web design course? HTML and CSS, have some understanding of it. A little bit. Anybody here refresh this quickly? What is HTML? Does anybody know what it stands for? Hypertext Markdown language, what HTML stands for. HTML is what in the system. It is the structure. We then have CSS. What does CSS stand for? Cascading style sheet, correct. What does the style sheet do for web pages? Yes, so look and feel, right? Look and feel. You can do a little bit more than that, but for all. The third layer of a web page is JS. I don't know, JavaScript. What does JavaScript do? JavaScript can do color technically, but it is typically known as the logic layer. How does it understand the system? How does it pull information in? How does it help you store or graph it? Now, design spends a lot of time in which two layers? The first two, right? I made my entire career by knowing HTML. I'm not a good JavaScript. I just know very little about it. I rely on web developers who have no more of that JavaScript. You can view almost all of your web page design through HTML and CSS. And most of what we do in the design system is establishing the rules for what goes into a CSS. And Figma is a great tool, but it's fundamentally abstracted your writing of CSS at some small level. Now, the relationship of how complicated that system gets is allowing us to then consider what are the things that we need to do to build something and how do we codify that in. Is that clear? Okay. Now, design systems generally in Figma are built on a certain set of concepts. One of them is the concept of style. When Figma first was launched, like whatever, 2008 or 10 or whenever, maybe a little bit after that, it's not that old. They ended up winning in the design space because they created something called style. Style has allowed you to sort of generally apply the rules across all your elements. So I create color, I stylize that color, and then I can apply that color style anywhere it has used, and it was a centralized space. If I change the root style, it changes it everywhere else in the thing. Style plus components, I could centralize my making and I could control, and we have the battle days of like, I have a nav that I was talking between 25 Photoshop pages and my client makes it clean. And then you had to go make that clean on 35 other files. So Photoshop didn't allow. We're glad those old days are gone. All of you here are benefiting. You have the fear of efficiency and effectiveness and tools. But they also make them a little bit more complex. Part of that complexity is that we start layering in more and more development-based stuff. So Figma, as a tool, has included concepts of things like styles and variables. A variable is a CSS concept that allows you to abstract content and label it in a way that is equally as useful as styles, but has more granular relations. Does that make sense? I'll go over this stuff a little bit more. But the opportunity for variables is that they essentially help you be specific about stuff, and they can variable can be used inside another variable, so it can daisy chain, which allows more control, but also more granular relationships. So I can have a color, and it can be used as the discount or the error, or so these are labels of how that color is being used, exact same color, and the discount semantic thing can be utilized in a component. So the discount color, I'm using in the discount component. The color then is applied to them. Related all the way back. Change the primitive color, it can change all the other things, but I can also then you'll get a sense of how to use it. But the role here is that, as you can see down here, this creates a root CSS file. The semantics becomes a way in which we, as semantic texture, the language that we use to call it something, right? And developers love a semantic relationship because it's no longer abstracting the code, it's giving it a specific label. We'll talk about building out semantic levels. But the semantic relationship of those systems are then more granularly controllable into all of this stuff. Right? So we're abstracting it out. Now, Figma is really good at centralizing making. Building out individual pages, or you're copying stuff over and over again, and you make a change. It should be made this is where components is quite useful. You make it once, and it cascades through all of its uses. How many of you use components or somewhat familiar? Okay, great. This sort of is a step inside of component making. Like I have my component, I can control it, just copy it over and over again. But now if I need to control the entirety of the system, I have another layer of granular control over things that component can and cannot. Does that make sense? Now, variables, and sometimes you'll hear this as design tokens. The design tokens and variables sort of get translated into themselves. Tokens are a little bit more, come directly from the coding world. Any of you familiar with, what is that? Storybook? The Storybook is a software layer that manages the code, the front end code. And there is a way in which to translate what you do in Figma as a source of truth into the level of code. So if you get into the working world, what you'll notice is that some places are more adept at managing their sources of truth. And as designers, we make the thing that we want to make in the world. We want to shorten the gap between what we intend and what is put in front of our eyes. And there are many tools to do this. Figma has become a decent one, but lots of places want to be able to, it ultimately is just an abstract. Figma isn't making anything yet. It's still not, it's sort of code, but it needs to be translated into code to then be a web page. So if you can shorten the gap between the things that you make in Figma and the things that get managed on a code base, you can speed up the process for building stuff. Does that make sense? Variables are a start to that. Because fundamentally, the variable layer is translatable faster into code and is quickly being managed both in our design software, but also on the code end. Cool. Yes, I'm using this output framework. Is this making sense? Now, I'll talk to you a little bit more about variables as we go, but variables fundamentally are made up of three types of things. One is color, The 3 layers of color. Color is what we'll spend a little bit of time talking about today, mostly spending some time in the color layer, because that has a big system of what we design. You can also make numbers. Numbers can be about sizing, output. Numbers can be lots of things. This is where variables become quite useful because they fundamentally just stand for something, right? Like I made a number, it's a 4. I don't have to go in and type 4 every time. I just call that extra small. And now I've called the number 4 extra small, and I can use extra small everywhere that I need in my string. And I'll show you the definition of that. You can also make strings. If we have time, I will show you how you can apply a typography system that now is managed in styles through strings. It's a little like backwards in my opinion, but this is the same thing that like Figma is like, oh, we're just going to release color as variables, we're releasing strings. You don't want to make a typography variable yet, but will allow you to control your typography string. And the other things are things like Boolean. Boolean is a binary on and off sort of switch. We sort of see Boolean a lot. A lot of times you see them as toggles. You use properties in your component. You can like turn icon on and off the properties. That's all using the Boolean property. I don't want that icon anymore. I'm going to turn it off. Still exists in your component. Now, the variables as a whole are managed in a variables library, which exists at the top level of your Figma page and translate into the library. So your styles live in your library assets, but you're putting maintenance and control where your library is through the variable channel. Let's do practice with the variable channel today. But where that sort of translates into is one, a labeling system, but also the distinction in Figma is a rectangle tip is a variable and a circle tip is a style. I don't know if I'm using style or variable, but it's a little confusing in Figma. Circle, style, rectangle, rounded rectangle is a variable. Right there. Now, we'll as I said, we'll practice more with this. And there's a number, you go on Medium or whatever. There's lots of design systems all writing your own documentation. And I'll show you a basic logic of how to sort of organize it. Now, in variables, the variables allow us to do stuff, and we can then call our variables both from the baseline. Then we'll talk about this as a primitive. All my primitive colors are a set of potential usages, and then I'm only going to apply that set of colors to a specific action, right? Like I have a button color. The button color gets pulled from my primitive list, label it as button color, and then it's saved when we'll get back. Now, the role of this, I think, can get quite confusing, is that you can have lots of them, but the opportunity to maintenance and control them from a centralized place fundamentally speeds you up, and you no longer then have to maintenance at the making level. Like once you wire it all together, you can then just go change it at the centralized place and it cascades through your group. Does that make sense? Oh, no, I'll show you how to do that. Now, these things all have different labeling processes, but fundamentally, you can even see here, like I have a surface primary, it has a color that creates 50, so this is pulling a variable into the surface primary color. Does that make sense? So we'll sort of show you how the baseline of colors, use one of those as another variable that then now, the role of variables, which I think is quite important, is this idea of that you have a value, an underlying value, a purple color, right? This color could be used, you grab it from the eyedropper tool, you could apply it in your color library, but it isn't really systemized. You do it that way. So you can establish this as a base variable. We'll talk about these as primitives. So it has a color, purple, at 50, at 500, that's the max. You have a range to that color. You have the primary color that you're using. That purple then can be used in an action, which you could call color action. And it's using the purple variable. And then be translated to another state usage, like background color of a button. You call it color background for primary color. Is this making sense? Or sort of data? Establish it as it exists. You label it. It then gets used inside a common action, and it can get used inside a more specific execution, which helps us as designers go, well, what is that? Oh, it's a button color. What is your button color? You have primary and secondary colors. What is the button color? You're like, oh, it's that purple 500, which I call button color. Is that making sense? And if it ever changed, all I have to do is change it here. Right? And I'll show you later that you can actually then make a range of these, and you can say, oh, I have button color as a root, but it actually has different versions of itself. It's a blue on a white background, and it's orange on a dark background, and it's yellow on another background. Well, that can be maintenance at the color mode level versus having to repeat and build the system over and over. Is that clear? Again, I'll show you how to do this in different sectors. Does anybody have any questions at this point about how variables work, what the rules, and this is just for color. Okay. Good. I'll do this. Now, variables are related to design tokens, and one of the things that this is another way to sort of talk about this. In this sample that scales up from general to more specific, is that sometimes people will call them base variables. In other places, they'll call them primitives. So this is a language component, which is sort of hard sometimes when you look at development teams. This has been a wide-arching discussion in CSS world for a long-ass time. What do you call stuff, right? Like, what is it labeled? How do you make the system? What do you call these things? And I have a friend of mine who is a front-end developer who can never be fired from his job because nobody knows what anything is called because he designed the label. Does that make sense? It's like, oh, yeah, job security through like making this thing really hard to understand. You designed that the system lives in his head or lives in their sort of. Now, we don't get that luxury a lot of times. Like most of the times we're handing this stuff off to developers or outputs, working with a front end team, knowing how they set up their CSS systems can help us define our variables and when we implement. So it is an option. It can be labeled lots of things, but also you would sort of standardize primitives as about for semantic labels that come up and the calling of things and then use it as a component. Does that make sense? Great. But you can see the sort of thing, all of the same thing. This color is the root. You label it the primary default. It can get used, that primary default color can get used in another variable called background brand and can be used again in a button primary default background. It adds more labels, but the labels add more specificity to your tokens for using that thing effectively. Is that clear? Correct. So the base variable and the primitive are two different words for the same stuff. Now, one of the things that's also quite important, and we are just sort of variables nest. So you use a variable and you can establish like the primitive variables. Those are all the base root variables that you have for color. Those things then get used inside a brand token or a brand label or inside there's a diff, negative, whatever you want to call these things. And the role of that is that I have, this is the person who's made this, they have Aloha 500, which is, they call that color Aloha. Maybe a brand color or whatever it is. There may be a range of 1 to 100. So you're using the 500 range of that color, and then this can get established across dark ocean, dark ocean. These are modalities of how that color system from its variable is utilized. We'll practice. Does that make sense? Now, if you get a little confusing, you know, wait, but the role of it is if you start at the root and you build out, just like this diagram back here, you start down here as what you build, you can then make things more and more specific as you move up in your system. You haven't defined them at their root level, it's very hard to make it more specific at the top. But just think of it like politics, right? Like this is the 50 grit sandpaper or 80 grit sandpaper. This one up here is your 220 grit. Remember sanded paper, sanded wood? You start with 220 and you're like, no, because that's not what you're doing, right? You want to remove some stuff. You're trying to navigate what the system is made of. You give yourself some more options that sort of translate into more. Is that clear? Okay. So let me just pull up the demo file and show you guys a little bit about this. So I have given you all a starter file. Yes. I realize some other people would do this. Here's the starter file. Sorry, for those that they got started a little early. Go make a copy of the ACC CBS starter file. And we can go from there. Okay. Okay. Everybody, what you'll get this deck, and then I'll also have a starter file, which looks like this. Make it duplicate this. I can see. Just go in and duplicate the file. You don't need a copy of it. Go to duplicate under the drop down. It'll duplicate it into your draft. Move your draft. You can work on it in your draft, but if you want to ever share it, you need to move it into a project file. You guys know. Hopefully you know this. I have like a million things in my draft. It's hard to share. But make a copy and also to show you what the baseline of this is going to show you. What we're going to be working on today is we're going to be modifying our design system to build out a more robust primitive set of colors to then apply to this card component that we can scale across other pages. And I'm going to give you a little preview of what this is going to look like. So here's the design. And I'm going to show you this as a fun little strategy. Here's my option. I drag it over here, it changes. I drag it over here, it changes. This saves you time. Like, oh, I have to just make it once, and now it has this range. Take a little bit of a setup, but we'll do that with our setup. Does it make sense? Yes. Under the drop down, there'll be a duplicate file that'll drop it in your draft, and then you can move it out of your draft into a work file if you want for sharing later. Is that clear? Oh, somebody wants to edit. Don't edit this file. I approve. I'm sorry. You can, but copy this onto your own stuff. You're going to be building this system on your own. Now, this is a starter file. It has a couple of assets, and I'll show you just briefly what is being built into this. So it turns out right now we have some text styles that have been defined. I have some color styles that have they have styles associated with them. Here's the ArtCenter dot color. Yep. But if we open up our variables, which if you click outside of the frame, you can open up this little variable thing with this right corner output with this variable. The baseline you have is you have primitive. I designed for you a version of this asset. Does that make sense? And these are in the primitive. So what you'll see is that I've called this thing primitive, and I have color under this with neutral. And this neutral has from 100 to 900. And these are all the colors that are established, and I have light and dark, which haven't been changed. But you can put it. I'm going to remove these. Is everybody clear here? Okay. We are going to go build out a set of color systems. But one of the ways to add a variable, if you want to add a variable, is you can click this add a variable button. And I can make a color, right? If I see how I just added it to the bottom of my variable set, if I wanted to make a brand color, I can hit brand backslash, and then I'm going to call it color backslash brand. Now this is showing it goes under. It was underneath neutral. This is something that's a little bit challenging about Figma. I'm going to delete this variable as it goes and delete the whole stop. Yeah. Okay. You can open up the variables by clicking this little UI button to the right at the top. It says variables. Underneath your page set, you have style. Like I haven't clicked on any page. I've clicked off my whole the Figma file completely, and it now gives me all of the system stuff that's aligned to my Figma file, and I can open up the variables panel. Does this make sense? Everybody here with me? Yes, yeah. Help your neighbors. If they can. Now you have some variables, right? And I have some color. I have the neutrals that I've created. This also has some brand neutral color. As you can see, this is actually nesting the asset. There's no variable. Yeah, help over there. It should have this variable component. It goes into the neutral. Yeah. So in here, in your primitive, so I have the same thing. The color is nested inside your neutral, right? Which you don't want. I'm going to delete this group. I'm going to delete this group as well. I want to create another asset inside a neutral. If you're where you selected in your color asset, it will put up, if you create a variable, it'll add it to wherever you selected. Does that make sense? So if I've selected in neutrals and I say add a variable, it's going to add it into my color variable. If I select color and I add a new variable, new color variable, see how it put it in a new space? Now I can, this is still under color. If I want to put this in a folder, I could call it brand backslash, and then I'll do 100. Let's just call it backslash. Backslash. Color backslash brand. Okay, so this has color, and I can just update the brand. And then here I can change this to 100. Does this make sense? Okay. So once you have a set, does everybody see how I did that? I created a variable. The variable can get added, and then I can relabel it as I need. By giving it a slash, it puts it into a folder, and so it nests it inside of color, and I have neutrals, and then I have brand. Does that make sense? So get one going, and then you can duplicate by right-clicking, duplicate variable, duplicate variable, duplicate variable. Do this 10 times. Oh, wait. Yeah, sure. That's my Zoom. I don't know how to do that right. Sure, wait, yeah. Let me stop sharing it. It's in my personal thing. The meeting ID number is 717. You want to join Zoom? 587-6270. And the passcode is 114183.
114183.
Yep. Kind of. Nice, that was nice and big. Thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, join. Now you can see this. No problem. So what I've done, right, is I created a brand set of variables, and there's 10 of them. They're all exactly the same. They're all 100 through 900, but I can change them. It's 200, 200, 300, 400, etc. Okay, does that make sense? Now, if you have this brand section going, this has already been established, but it's not linked back to your style. Does that make sense? So we're going to do this by just grabbing, you can just open this color and you can change it. 1, 2, etc. 3. This already has a list of the colors from 0 to 900. In the brand of ArtCenter Orange, that's the brand. And they have to label it ACTG brand. So thinking that there's a thing that. Get a neutral, update all your colors for the things that are there. Good. Yep. Good. Got it. Duplicate that 10 times. Yeah. Duplicate there again to add more. Yeah. And then you make 10 of each on the brand. Yeah. So we're building that same color. So every color every group color that we're going to create. So I have gray. I have an orange. The orange has from 0 to 100, and we'll do it for 2 other colors as well. Does this make sense? Yeah. Wander around to make sure everybody's on the page. Yeah. Questions? Great. I can mark. You are. No, this is the, you have to. I don't know. So we just found a Figma. Figma. Some of you have actually made it a brand new interface for Figma. You have a brand new interface. Figma, the variables are located in the left rail versus up here on the right. So you got it? You're figuring it out? So they are, like any piece of software, it changes a lot, annoyingly so. So find where that thing is that's an access upstairs. That makes sense. Okay, so everybody, have you gotten to this place where you've updated all of your colors to these things? This is 400, 500. Okay. Now, what we're doing here essentially is just establishing a set of primitive variables that allows us to utilize that at will for other things. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. Let's just get to this space. We're going to go do this 4 other times, but I'm going to give you a way to speed this up. Okay. So now we have the neutral as variable, then we create the brand variable for the label that are all primitives. You're giving them labels from 1 to 900. Just go in the color there. Those all have a root value. Root value can be changed, but most of us are sort of utilized. Now, we want to do this for our other colors as well, which we have in established for here, right? We have green, we have orange, yellow, and we have red. So one way you can do this is you can duplicate a group. So go duplicate a group, and it adds it below, and you can modify this, and we're going to call this we're going to call this success. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Success. Right now it's these same green numbers, but we're going to modify this to the green, but I'm going to give you a sort of resource for speeding up, making you color range. Okay. So here you guys can go to sorry. Here. Go to colors.ava.design. This is just an online portal for helping you figure out the range of these colors. You go back into Figma, where you can go grab the root color. So this is 0.1, 00A732. Copy that. Paste it. It'll modify the things, and do that with a blue, an orange, and a red. That makes sense. And exist here in your color system. So let's grab the yellow for our warning. And the last one is the red. And then if you have a blue color that you want to use for your info, use the blue. Any color you want. Green, blue, yellow, and red, whatever you want those ranges to be. But as you can see, it sort of automatically drops these for you, color range. And then we can take a screenshot of that and put it into Figma. When you put the color range. Okay? I'm not sure. How many colors? Yeah. So that's a system-wide question of how many colors. We have 5 colors, right? Those 5 colors are now going to be established into a range, so now we have 60 colors. So we typically do a 9 to range from 100 to 900. We're taking the blue color and it's giving you 9 colors of that color. And so we have 5, some color systems have far more than 5, but they just have a few. Does that make sense? Yeah. Oh, okay. That's weird. That's weird. Oh, that's so annoying. You have to type it in here. Oh. So, again, I didn't design this. This is Ava's tool. But now we're user testing it in real time. You have to type your color code into the box down here, not into this. Does that make sense? So, open it, type it here. That works. It was when you type it in this box, when you click on the box, then it'll really go back. Yeah, well, you need it in both colors. So you can add another block, another style or blue. So that one can feel. And you're making this is automatically making them. So, the root, the design system I gave you does not have it in both, but you can establish it for your thing. Does that make sense? It's just a color box. So what you want to do, take a screenshot of that color system and drop it into your Figma file. And then you can use your eyedropper tool to establish primitive variables for all of those colors. Does that make sense? Everybody clear with that? So here, I'm going to change this back to that teal color which I had. Let me go back. That's up to you. So, I mean, mine is a starter place, right? You can make the colors any you want, but there is a recommendation that you make brand colors, right? And I have the ArtCenter brand, and I have the inverse of the ArtCenter brand, so I have orange and teal. And then I have the warning, the success, the warning, the error, and an info button. So I need another blue for info, drag another swatch, make it blue. Now I have the most saturated blue color, or whatever, right? But every brand system is going to be a little bit different, but the opportunity there is that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now this color system that sort of automatically pumps these things out for you, and I have that one here. It'll update some of these as it goes, but I can now copy this. This is a screenshot. And put it into Figma, into my Figma file. So here, so screenshot. Screenshot. Move that out of the way. So I have these images. I just have an image of this stuff. So I haven't established these yet. I could copy this down here just to give a record of it, but fundamentally this is going to exist in two places. This is swatches on in my colors profile, and it also is going to be duplicated into my variables. Does that make sense? So my variables, I can open back up, and I now have a success that I can just go grab the eyedropper. Eyedrop this, I can say 100, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now you have these color systems that are created this range, and you can go duplicate your variables and relabel them success, warning, error. That's it. There are some other tools, plug in to some extent to use some of this stuff, but if you don't know how to make a variable, you don't want to start it out. It's good. It's good. Making colors. Oh. Go on the Figma forum to like send it. Can you just have the dialogue box open all the time? That would be good. Yep. Yep. And then you do that for yep. Oh, okay. Sorry, we do the whole thing. You got it. Yep. Yeah. You got it. God, he made us do this stuff in class. Does nobody understand why we're setting up this system? It seems kind of rote, right? It's a lot of like, oh, I just compute it on a computer. But fundamentally, once you get it set up, you never know how to do it, right? We don't have to say it like that. So we're just setting up those five. That covers a lot of what the color system will do. Now, colors generally in design can be lots of different color systems that are really complex. We usually try and keep them down, just like typography, right? It's like no more than 2 typefaces, no more than 5 colors. The more you simplify it down at the beginning, you then don't get it overused. I once worked at a company where they had 80 buttons. And the design system team spent like 6 months making buttons. And I'm like, this is insane. We need 5. Like, why are we 80? They're like, oh, we thought maybe this thing would be 80. I'm like, no, we need 5. 5 buttons. And we have to do some data. He's like, research shows the number of components being used. And we're like, look, 5 buttons. Everywhere else goes away. Like, this is insane. We're making this kind of stuff. Systems that we need. Now, once you start getting your primitives set up, everybody has the 5 primitives set up, label. I'm going to just move over to my final thing to show you. It should look something like this. In your primitive, you have color, you have ArtCenter, you could have the secondary, and then neutral, success, warning, danger, and info. Yes. Yep. That's the part. you want to make a different primary secondary and label it different, fine. Good. Yeah, good. One of the things about this system over here that's a little bit annoying is you can't drag them around. They get put in the order, you mix them. But similar to that. Now, this color system that I'm establishing in my variables list, when I open up a color box and I need to change something, so I'm just going to go to my components, I can now establish this connected to a style. You can see in my libraries that I have my style and I have my variable. Is this clear? So this is how you then tie your variable to the asset. So right now we were just establishing the rules. And when you do say, oh, I'm going to go take that card and I'm going to establish it back to its set of rules. Is that clear? I'm pretty good at that. So even here, these are still, the fill is still just a card, an asset, right? The D1, 201. I can say I'm going to tie that back to this 600. Does that make sense? So now you can see that this swatch, which was a color at its root value of, is now tied to this color ACD primary at the ACD 600. Does that make sense? You can see that color primary. I can drag this up so you can see it more here. Similarly, this is the 800. I just made the swatch, but I wouldn't attach it to mine. And I can tie the swatch back to its library. This is 700. Does this make sense? Your variables are only, these are just like, they're ready to now be applied to stuff. You can have to, so link that in your part. Yeah. Yes, and then you update those. Look, so this color system here, right? This is just a record, right? This is a visual record. Here, this is a visual record of what I have established in my style, in my variable style relationship. So I've just visualized it. So I can hand this off to designers, or I could give this to a development team, or my client to sort of review this. Your client is never going to open a variables panel unless they're a developer. So this is a way to sort of say, like, here's what we're using, and here's the styles that they're called. They're also a way to label it, right? You can sort of see, I'm calling it secondary. It's just a document, right? It's fundamentally documentation. Is that clear? Individually tying it together. There's some plugins, but that's a little bit more. I'm making you do the rote process. Like anything else, you'll do it the hard way and then you speed it up. You don't know how to do it the hard way, you're the speeding it up, there's no good, right? Right. Yeah, and you see how this swatch is now being tied back to the good. So making sure your variable there, you will not need to do that in your file. So this is your step, your primary. That I guess so now you're tying that swatch. Yeah.
Everyone figures it out. The second question too.
You hit the one. There is some yes, of course there is. Like anything in software that's always the fast way, the hard way, you better with that. So you're gonna establish a variable list and you'll say, go, hey, plug in, go to my variables from So a variable is part of a small library. Styles are global. Variables are units that can be repeated. So a style can only be established from one unit that is used everywhere. A variable is a unit that can then be more. I'll show you how to do this when we talk about semantics. Correct. Exactly. Right? Like you can use we just think a painting class. Right? This is paint. This is the paint. There's an option. You have to use that class in a meaningful way. And now we're going to look at how that color is being used. This one needs to be a button. This needs to be an icon. Yeah. Oh, the whole thing? Oh, I think it was established in San Francisco Pro. If you don't have San Francisco Pro, you have to start. Second. Yeah. Really good. Okay, in your primitive, you're in your style guide template. I've also established a baseline grid. You guys can also establish variables as numbers. So this was color, right? All these up here are color, neutrals, success. I would have had 5 others. There's also a spacing one. I've established some spacing 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 16. So 2, 6, 4, 6. Another color system. I also, if you wanted to create more, let's say you have one for your corner radius. This is where you can create another number. Oh wait, I'm gonna do this. Sorry. Variable in my spacing. Add a number. This is going to be called radius. Small. And this is where I can establish just a small radius. So that's maybe 2, maybe my other one. I'm going to duplicate. Let's say I have 3 different types of radiuses. Maybe it's 2, and it's 8, and it's let me do different size, 5, 10, and 20. This would be small. This is medium. This is extra small, small, medium, large. Okay, I'm just establishing some rules. These number variables are just about establishing where it's used. And I'll show you how to do this. Is that clear? So it was down to my spacing. You had a base grid that had these, and I created a radius grid. And we know why I made a radius grid. Yeah, and it's more specific, right? It's not just generally a number, but it's used for a specific execution, right? In my printer. Is your label the same? Oh, so you can't right now. You have it somewhere else that's good. Yeah. So then do that R, you have to label it.
Oh, okay.
So R, FN, R, limited. And I believe mine, I have, yeah, it doesn't repeat. There's some other. Is that clear? Now, again, think of this stuff as just the underlying rules that you will be using later. So sizing, we're going to use a lot. Color, we'll use a lot. Typography, we can use a lot. And typography can also have its unique sizing. So here I have, I'm just gonna, you can do a typography sizing. This has H1 through H6, the P-body, P-body 2, and the caption. So these are labels, they have sizes. I think these are already established for you. Correct. That help? Is that making sense? Like, I'm establishing these primitive rules. There's just a baseline stuff that you need to that we can then start thinking into the work that is generally we're going to apply. Does that make sense? So now that I've established these semantic variables, let's go back to my original. So okay. So one of the things that's kind of challenging about Figma is you can apply variables back to your stuff in lots of different places, and there's a little UI button that you need to look out for in the UI, and that is this little thing right here. See this little apply variable bit? This floats around, but mostly is used in places where you need to establish a tieback, right? So if you have a card and it has an appearance with where I establish this as a 60 frame quarter radius, but I'm like, nope, I want that to be part of my color rule, my radius rule. I'm going to establish that this is part of my radius and it is large. Does this make sense? You can see here. When you establish an element back to just a unit back to a variable in your right panel, it'll establish it here. You know, it's like this thing that's in a box, and it's part of my color. So it's no longer a number. Actually, what's weird about Figma, generally that's kind of annoying, is that still uses a number. Right? It still says 20, but it is fundamentally large. Right? So this is the stuff that I complain about with Figma all the time, because it's like, I get so annoyed with them, like this, you made me label it in my variable. Let me use the label. Stop showing me the underlying unit. And this little UI that flips around is it's all over the place. It's very frustrating. But again, I am sort of blessed. I don't have to work at Figma, so it would be very, very hard. But I'm sure there are 4 others, like developers and designers bitching at you. Like that would be the worst job ever. It's like, what? No. Why do you guys want me so much? They just wreck tools. The other thing that I will sort of generally complain about Figma is that it doesn't force you to keep your system consistent. You can do it, you can use it any way you want. But generally that screws you over time. Why didn't do that right? And you ever design something and then you're like, oh wait, now I have to go tie it back to a system. It takes forever. So if you set up your system early, build out your stuff like this, and then apply it into the things you're designing, then when you have to modify them later, it's simple. Right? Shit, I want a 30 corner radius. I just go change the variable, right? From 20 to 30 or to 60, and it modifies the element that it links back. Does this make any sense? Now, your system that you're using in variables is only as good as tying it into the things you design. You make all the variables you want, they'll tie into the things you're designing. Your variable system is really that helpful. Right? Tie them into the stuff you're designing, apply them to your color system outputs, that's sort of a line. Okay. Does everybody have their primitive design? Yep. You have your primitive colors, neutrals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So now we have an opportunity that we set up these variables to go establish what we call semantic variables. Now I'm going to go back to my lecture just to show you how semantic variables work. Now, semantic variables, sometimes you'll see them in the cell phone. So a semantic variable, can you take it in class? Let's see if that's going to be fun. Okay, so do you know what the word semantic means? What is semantic? The word of the word meaning? The word of the word meaning, yes. Right? As like people who understand language, we establish logic, and we can instead create meaning to the things that are underlying its outcome, which is where semantic variable relationship is rooted. Most coding languages are associated under human linguistics. We write code based on how humans can read them, and then therefore we establish that because the human being has to apply the system effectively. And we can establish semantic relationships for calling things how it's used. For example, I can call it a background and the brand. So what is that? Where is this color going to be used? In the background. Yeah, I'm not being okay. It's exactly what it says. Call it how it's used, right? So it's used it's the brand color in the background of an element. So I can say this color is used in the background. Use this brand color in the background. Like wherever that background is, you can then link that back to the semantic variable, which is this color called light primary light, also called brand background. Does this make sense? And now we have an opportunity to establish how our colors are going to be utilized. Right? So let's go back into our design system and click into your semantic token. We're going to create a new semantic token. And part of this is start to think about like, well, how is color generally used? Right? Color can be used for type. Color can be used for background. Color can be used for buttons. Color can be used for labels. Color can be used for, you get my point, right? So some of these things that we start with is, let's just go start with background, right? So add a color variable. We're going to call this background. And this is where we can establish the brand. So now I have background, I have a brand. And now I can link this color variable back to a primitive color. So now I have the brand ArtCenter 500 as a variable used inside of another variable called background brand. Does this make sense? You know, if you things together. But now, if I need to use a background for the brand, I know it's this 500 color. Is that clear? Fine. No, you have to go look for how actually how I can do things. So I call this surface. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to call this surface. And then I have my brand surface. I could also have another variable. This could be background. And one of the things that's also quite helpful about semantic tokens, and I'll show you it in this, is semantic tokens can be established as modalities. So I have my tokens that I'm utilizing in a primitive. Primitives are just how colors are used, and I establish them into my semantic tokens of color background, and I can also create those as modes. So I can create a new mode by clicking this plus sign over here. And I can establish a mode of light, dark, and what's the third modality? I'm going to call it invert. Whatever mode you have. Is this making sense? So now I have this brand color, and it could be the same as it is on light, and it is on dark, and it is on invert, but maybe it actually changes as it moves between these elements. I don't have the blue. I'm going to go make it this light for me. Is this making sense? What I just did? Yeah. So in your semantic token, you can establish 3 different modalities by hitting this plus sign in the corner. So that adds a new variable mode. And I can then relabel that variable mode light, dark, and whatever your other variable mode would be. Is that clear? Okay. Oh, seriously?
Yeah, so I often
do that. Really?
I moved my file. So I moved my file to one of the possible so
So if you are in your draft, move it into a project folder. That might allow you.
that's that you're in a class of because whatever class folder that you're expected in there is.
Yeah, yeah. So that your draft file, you need to move your file out of a draft folder into your education.
Well, not your own. I just moved it to a class that I have because all my.
Oh,
Went file.
that's so annoying. See, this is the kind of shit that Figma does to people. It's like, no, if they're students, let them make mode out like that. This is don't work.
But then my professor's files with the classes education on it.
All of you should be able to have an education account. Have you gone to
I
Figma?
know mine is an education account, but the things like it's an education account, it's under group.
Oh, so yeah, this should be under an EDU. If it's under EDU, like I don't
But
make sure it's in your draft is in a project that's in an EDU file, and that's what you do that mode. Oh no, that's not. Okay. Yeah, and that okay, that makes sense. So what I would do, like what I've already sort of done here, it's a little hard to see a little bit. It's a little hard to see though. I wish I could see that. So what I have done here is I've created a surface semantic token, a semantic variable, and I've labeled it default, teal, gray, and white, which is the colors that I have. And then I've given these light, dark, and inverse colors, and I've established this 500 color as the brand, as the light default background, this light color as the variable of ArtCenter for dark, and the dark teal for the inverse. Does that make sense? Now, if I then go into so you can do that, create different link colors back to your aspect. You don't do exactly like I'm doing it, but I'm essentially using the light, the dark of the orange. I think it was the 500 and the 200, and then I inversed it with my secondary color for my teal background, for my inverse. Does this make sense? Now you can create more of this than you need. I've also created a semantic token for your button text and your background layer. The button usage. But get your surface start. Does that make sense? I'm just going to go show you a quick thing with the surface. So I'm going to establish that here as well. I need to do. Let me go back into my variables because I don't have them into my primitives. I need to establish the duplicate one. So this is my success with my green one. I'm going to duplicate this. Group label as inverse. Inverse. Move it. And I can then do 100, 200. Pretty fast. Recently. It feels like a lot of moving back and forth. Yeah, I'm just doing it so I can show you the three of these. Now, the semantic, yeah, there was a discussion over there, like what does the semantic thing do for you? Right? Why not you just use this baseline color? And the role of a semantic variable, which is quite helpful, is that it lets you be more specific, right? It establishes the way that color is being used. Eight hundred, 900, 8, 9. Okay. So now in my semantic variables, I've established this output and I can establish it back to a color inverse, right? So by utilizing a semantic variable of surface and brand, I know what the surface is. My surface brand color essentially has built into it two other colors, right? Because fundamentally, it's not just this orange color. This orange color is tied to a mode that's dark and a mode that's inverse. Does that make sense? And now I can then link this brand color back to a unit and then give it rules, right? Its rules are that I'm going to use the brand brand surface color, and that has two other modes built into its variable system, which then means I can sort of change that. Yes. Like anything in code, it's case sensitive. You just see, like this makes me not a good developer because I'm serious. Like I can't tell you how many times I just like spell the freaking CSS thing without camel casing, and I was terrible at spelling as a kid. So just like the idea was like drove me crazy. It's like why I'm not a good developer. Like I'm not specific enough, but I can do this stuff because it gives a little bit more freedom. The opportunity here is that now that I've established this semantic token, I can go tie that back into a variable, into a usage. So now I have this thing, here's a surface. I can now establish this surface into my brand, right? Surface brand. This element that I just changed to be this variable also has a dark mode and an inverse mode built into the color modality of this brand. Does that make sense? And now, because of that, I can go establish the rules. I'm going to show you this in your design. There's 3 frames that are sort of built for you. Go change these to dark to light, dark, and invert. Grab one more frame. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. I clicked on this container that has a fill surface. Does that make sense? So that's where this is established. There's some other things in there. There's the nesting layers. This is a auto laid out component. It has a container. The container can be filled with this variable, right? Now, because this is a variable that has a surface that's brand, I can also say, oh, okay, this needs to be established as its variable aspect. Similarly, I want you guys to just create a baseline, just do another variable called color. And we're just going to create the sort of just the base background. We call this frame. Frame color. And here we're going to make one light white, one that is dark, 800, and then in my invert, I'm going to use. Sorry, take a look at my final. The steel color. I'm going to go use the 500 as well. Is this making sense? I'm just creating some variables for my frame color. Because I'm going to show you how to do this in your frame. So in your design, you have 3 frames. These frames have no fill, right? They're just filled with color. So now I'm going to fill them with my primitive color. And I can establish this as my color. And here, hold on. Why? Okay. So the minute you apply a variable to a frame, it now brings up this little UI in the corner. Something that I struggle with this. For a frame to establish the rules, you have to apply a variable to it, and then this little UI shows up in the corner with this little question. And now I can say, hey, I want this frame to apply a variable mode. And I can then say, oh, I have established 3 variables. I want it to be dark. And you see that it automatically updates this to dark. But this now has in it, and I'll show you in the frame over here that I just created, this frame 42, which I gave it a variable and then changed its variable mode to dark. It shows me the mode is dark. Does that make sense? Everybody here with me? So again, I established the light, dark, and invert for color. The way variables function in Figma is Figma doesn't know that it's tied to your variables in any way. So your frame has to be sort of synced back to your variable list before you can establish that it's part of your file. Does that make sense? No. Oh, and I'll show you this again. So if I create a frame and I want this frame to do something for me, so I just whack F and drag a frame. One of the things you'll notice is that the frame, I can't change its variable mode, right? There's no UI here to help me change its variable mode because the frame doesn't have any rules. It's not tied back to anything yet. So the minute I actually say, I'm going to establish this as a brand color, So I've given that a brand color. Now my frame. The last time. This is the stuff about so annoying. It's like it's software. It works the exact same way every time. Actually, this is something that I fundamentally hate about Figma. This is terrible UI. This little UI button that's here should not appear and disappear at will. It should be grayed out. Very simple for Figma, right? Because the minute you haven't established it, I don't know. So now you have to look this up. But the way to do this is you tie this frame back to a variable. Do it here. And now this frame let me tie it to just another. Let me do it here. Okay. So the minute you tie, so you have to tie this frame to a variable that has a semantic, that has modalities. Is that clear? So I have these variables here, right? One of these is primitive. It's just a single set of values, only has one mode. I then have created a semantic variable which has modes. So if you want to use the mode, you want to establish the modality in your frames, you have to tie your frame back to a color in this modality thing, and then this UI over here, I can change it to semantic and make it dark. Does this make sense? Uh-huh. I don't. Okay. You have a new UI, it's changing everything. Is this making sense why I'm doing this? Okay, it's a little quirk of Figma, but if you want to utilize the modality that you've established in your semantic variables, your underlying frame has to be connected to that system. Is that clear? And then this little UI can show up that allows you to do this. Now, one of the values of this, which I'll show you, is that because I've established this surface back to default, right? It now has modalities. And when I drag this to its other surface, because this is established as the dark mode, right? I can also change this to light and see what it did. Or inverse. Because that's applied inside the system. Does that make sense? Make it dark. And my background is going to be
Background on ArtCenter College of Design.
You have to establish the frame to your system of semantic colors that have modality, and then I can, it essentially establish the rules, right? This frame is using the light mode. This frame is using the dark mode. This frame is using the inverse mode. Once you do that, whatever you drag onto that will then apply those rules to that part. That's it? This is like, I was going to say, you other time. As I drag things into stuff, it's easy. Right? Right? I'm dragging to your index. So, this is in the graph. let's use this. Into your target. Go to Figma.com. That's what we all that will get you. You're don't want to be able to access it and that like that's it. This is not the draft. All you do
Yeah.
This is a thing with like their stock isn't doing well, so they're like, oh, we got to go make revenue. Yes. Right. Oh, because for your primitive in your variables, your primitives only have one mode. It's just the value of the primitive. So if you establish your frame back to your primitive, it only has that mode. In my semantic variables, I have established 3 modalities. And when you tie a frame back to a color system, then I can apply those rules to those frames. Does that make sense? Yes. And make them more like we just did one that like this circle. You'll do this for your buttons. You'll do this for the stroke. And now, when creating labels for if you want to group things in so you can see here, like I have a surface. It has some stuff for default field and output or icons. I have my surface for strokes. What are some other things that get color? Let's do, I know. Let's make a new, I'm going to go into my surface. I'm going to create a new color. This is going to be drop down. Yeah, your drop down. Backslash. Sorry. By giving a label with a backslash, that label backslash goes a file in everywhere in Figma. You do this in your icons, you do this in your component layer. This is a labeling system for nesting elements in your stuff. Does that make sense? Here's the final.
Is there a reason why you don't make that from the primary? Like why you separated and the white one?
Yeah, so the reason that this exists in the semantic is because the modality of the color usage is tied to its mode. So I have a button, right? I'm going to just go to my button. So I have my button. My button has 3 states. I have the semantic usage of that primitive color that is then used in light, dark, and invert.
Go back to one stuff.
Bingo. Just make it feel like I lost all of you. It got you. I was actually really hard. Getting it? 3 modalities. That's the light, dark, and hue. Now it's oh, because I established this color so I'll show you guys how to do that as well. So there was a question of like, wait, why do I have 2 systems here? See here, I've established this background is dark and dark. I have primitive and I have semantic. So I have light, dark, and neon, which is part of a system that was designed before, which is part of my primitive. But I want my thing to be semantic. So you see how I'm changing the rules. You see how, like, this is where your systems can get really sophisticated. So you want to keep them relatively simple. Where I recommend is your primitive stay simple. Color, unit. Your semantics are where you add more scale. And the role of semantics in your opportunity here is that in your variables, for example, sign, I then know that my color variables occupy a larger system in the semantic view. That's logical. And one of the things that also is, as you tie these things together, this semantic output has, this is my background color, my text elements, so all of these. I can also establish things like sizing to this. And I can create a number system. At the top. Right, and now I'm going to call this like small card. I'm going to call this card. And my sizing here card size. So I have my card. That was just down at the bottom. And now I can come in here and I can tie these back to other sizes. So maybe I want my card system to be small, medium, and large. And the card can then get bigger or smaller based on its sizing. Is this making sense? So there's all these things that you can control that have range. Colors can change between modes. The sizing of things can change between modes if you're working across responsive design, right? The component is tied to its sizing output, and you can then establish your system to that. Right there?
So was the number so outlining something like in a white
Yep, exactly. And I would establish that, which ties back to your primitive label, but allows you to then say, oh, like, oh yeah, I want my stroke in dark to be, let's say, large, right? And my inverse, I'm going to tie this back to another primitive value of small, and now I want this one to be extra, extra small, right? So now I have this sizing rule, and in my variable, I can go to my stroke. Close this thing real quick. Move it out of the way. So I'm going to go back to my component. My component here doesn't have a stroke, but I can establish the stroke, and I can tie this stroke back to a spacing base grid or to a now I have a semantic variable called card. So now I establish it to my size. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So the sizing variable is no longer just general, it's tied to the semantic usage of that element. So I've established the size of my stroke, and then that stroke has a variable. The variable has 3 different sizes that are in its table. You know, it's all the granular stuff. The minute you establish one rule, those rules then can also have range. That range is established in your variable system. You now control it at a granular level. And at scale, this really helps you. If you're not designing one little element that you move around the page, you're saying, oh, this thing can be modified. And I don't modify it on the card, I modify it in the disk. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because ultimately, that's what a developer's doing anyway, right? You hand over a card design to them, it looks really nice, and they're like, oh, what do it? Or I saw it almost. The minute you create a backend, if you want to conceptualize it, the variables are a backend to your entire set of rules. You know the rules, you can maintain them and store them, but it also then scales your opportunity for building things once and raising them as you need. It's pretty fun. This becomes really quite useful as you work responsibly when you establish mobile, desktop, and tablet and desktop view. You run one card, there's no modalities, there's variable mode, and I can drag it between sides. The component literally will change as you drag between the variables to get it. And then that's pretty easy. Yes. What was the value of calling it surface? So so there's lots of ways to call things, but in a surface, the surface can apply to lots of different things. So the surface is the parent semantic token, and the surface then can be applied to icon, stroke, background, drop down, like all the, it gets more granular and specific. So I call it surface because surface can be lots of things, but a thing that I can then get more specific about is I need to establish a variable and a sort of color rule for my stroke. It doesn't have to be surface. It doesn't have to be named surface. What do you mean? You can name it anything you want, but just you name it surface because you can. Yeah, and the role of a semantic token language is that it's there to help with specificity. So if I'm going to use the surface and it's a stroke, and I know that I have a surface and I have a stroke, now I have a rule system that I can follow quickly. Yes, it's just repeating some of the stuff you can already do to a frame. Like I can take a frame, replace the color, I can make a stroke, make the radius point change, etc. But now if I have the system in my token, like primitive values that are established into semantic values, the semantic values can then be ranged and have more data. But oh, now I'm getting it. I did it. But number? Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't know. I didn't just choose surface for fun. I didn't choose primitives for fun. I didn't choose buttons for fun. Like this we utilize the language that what some of us as designers understand, but also that translates quickly to writing code. A developer knows what a surface of a button is, right? The button, for example, has rules, right? The button has 5 states. I don't have the other 2 here. I just mostly want you to know the 5 buttons. No. Focus and default and disable. Focus is a button state for accessibility purposes, typically used for when you use screen readers, they tab through a website, the button looks selected and you haven't used it. It's useful for helping non-sighted like more accessibility for people on the web. Now, by establishing these rules, right now I can sort of build out like, oh, I want all my buttons to be able done this way. This gets a lot more complicated, but your design system and your variables can also be utilized for interaction design. So if you know what these rules are, you can prototype and make your buttons interactive through variable mode changes. There's already one. There's already over. Like what? But the purpose of this stuff is that when you establish it as a thing, right? I have it in my system. It has modalities. That then can be used. Utilizing the system effectively with how it's called and labeled also then can be extended into making this thing functional, right? And the role of building any design system is not that you just made it look nice, it's that you let people use it, right? And the role of prototyping or making a web page or any sort of stuff, it's like, I just want to speed up making a form work or making a user click a button that works, and I want to be able to roll over that button and push things. Now we can build that as very, I've done it here in the design system, right? Here is a button. It's established as the 5 states of the button, right? Hover, selected, focus. These are variants of the component. Good. I don't want to be presumptive. Has everybody used variants in component states? Right? These can be prototyped, which is also kind of rad. Like I have a variable, I can, and I haven't done it for these, but I'll do this. In the prototype mode, I can take this and establish it as, I like this way because it's more visual. On, roll over. Did it get rid of roll over? Of course it did. But well, hover. I don't know why it's this round. But you then change to this, the state. You can have it dissolve and you have smart animate. But this is essentially prototyping this into the state. Similarly, I can also prototype this as a you can establish this as a there's a UI that says change variable. And like, oh, I just need to change. So versus building, I like it this way. This is how I was trained to do it. This is how it's good. I like it because it's visual. I can see it. The buttons are there. And I grab copies of them and they work. And they have the variable and they have the all of the assets, right? So if I copy this button, this has all of the states. Right? Now, similarly, all these button states, the colors, all the rules are also tiable back to your variable. Already created the variable system. I know designers, I just need to make one button. All of my color systems that are from the variables, I don't need to make all these other button states, but I'm just going to change the variable to make the button. Does that make sense? I feel like I jump around for the tool a lot. So I think it's kind of confusing. So now that you've started to do some of this, what I want all of you to do is go into your color, your surface, and just build out some more semantic variables or the things that you want to modify in your part. Right? So there's the surface, there's the stroke, there's the icon, there's the I have type in here as well. So the things that I've established in my surface is icon, stroke, drop down. I've also established the drop down as a zone, which I did a thing. I can do the text as its own thing, the color, button background, etc. Yes. They let you modify the style. So, yeah, so we just have, we can, and since we're in all this, where semantic variables are the applied to the learning, we call it. We can children, but if you wasn't, you just have to overriding, does that make sense? Maybe that's where you look at it. To go back to your, to the comment. Only use children and now this one. Why would it go? So it is working. Technically it's working. Right? But what you do. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So, in here, you may have somewhere. So I'm using your primitive and I'm using what maybe that would, but it's fucking okay. Yeah. So somewhere in there you establish elements back to primitive and back to primitive. The argument is you create your primitive, use all of your primitives, and tie your semantic tokens to the system of the vector.
Somewhere,
I'm sure everyone some small accents here. Yeah. On what? So the difference is that this is just for color of the surface of my background. This could be my background surfaces, and then I call it the surface of icon.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. And now I have the surface of the drop down. So you're essentially just labeling. You could have them all as one set of 35 variables that are all on the same level. That doesn't help, right? I have a million variables. No, like the variables have a semantic relationship, and you nest them into surface, icons, text, drop down, etc.
So when you click on the back imagine all of them were for
Yes. So anytime I'm executing this, all of these show up, right? But I want to utilize, and I can even do this. This is where Figma does need a little help in the way you do this. Variables is relatively new, so it still just lists all your variables over here. Kind of annoying. But I think you should be able to say, only show me the semantic variable. I don't want to see the primitives. The primitives are tied into my semantic variable. But we don't get that option. But ultimately, they're all here, right? If I scroll up, I have all of my variables. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, if you tie an element in your card back to a primitive and one to the semantic, it'll do this thing. So I'm going to show you this. Here's my button background default, which is part of my semantic. I could have also tied it to this color. So this is the color Danger 400. This now as an element, it utilizes, back to my design, and what I believe it'll show you is, see this here, the dark says inverse +1, and here I think in light it'll say the same. Dark it says +1. What this is telling you is that I'm utilizing the inverse semantic mode plus, but it has another color system it's looking at. It's also using the primitive color variable because I established that button back to the primitive. The what I recommend is you establish your semantic or your primitive token. And I'm going to go back forward to the tokens of variables. You establish your primitive variable, tie all of your primitive variables into semantic variables, only use the semantic variables in the execution of your vector. Because the semantic token allows you to call it exactly what it is, right? This is the button color, this is the stroke, this is the drop down, and that's how you execute that. Is that clear? Okay. I realize I can get kind of confused. The role of semantic tokens, which is really, really valuable for all of you, is that as you establish more rules, it ties to the stuff you're making. So sometimes semantic variable systems can be quite robust, right? It can be cards, it can be NAS, it can be for footer, like it's all the stuff that you're using. But when you establish it, it actually is quite useful because you're no longer like, oh wait, did I tie that to that thing? No. You're like, you know what? I need to work on a different brand. Like I can go change the primitive variable, and it will cascade through all of the semantic tokens as long as they're tied back to my primitive token. This was fun until you did that thing, and then it sucked. I came close, and then you did that thing, and it was like origami, right? You're folding, and you're like, how'd you get that move? I don't understand that move you did. That one move is like, no, how'd you get there? That's so quick. So variables and tokens are essentially language for the same stuff. And tokens came first. So Figma, when it first started, did not have tokens. And a bunch of developers got together and said, like, yeah, Figma's really useful, but we wanted to tie into our front end system, which utilize tokens. Now, a token library is built of what? Variables. Exactly. So Figma, when they decided to implement it, didn't implement tokens, they implemented variables. Yeah, it's a weird vocabulary. Like, part of it is sort of silly that we call these. I sort of, if I need a developer, I just want to punch them in something. Actually, Figma is really frustrating because they call it auto. They need to use auto layout or play around auto layout. What is auto layout? It's Flexbox. Fundamentally, it's doing CSS and Flex. But they didn't call it Flexbox. They called it auto layout. I mean, it's no tool for designers who don't want to learn to code, but they have to learn to code because they're fundamentally implementing Flex in their design, right? Now, we call it auto layout, how it implements itself into Webflow or into user resources, stuff like it's Flexbox. Now, I can't stop that, except that similarly with variables, the way we label these things and call them helps us as designers because we ultimately are establishing the system, but are also communicating those bits and bobs, the underlying units, out to a larger team. And some of you may go in the world and go work on design systems. And I work on design systems. I was at a Fortune 500 organization that had the shittiest design system I've ever seen. I was like, I don't know about 80 designers working there. They're like, yeah. I'm like, this is fucking bullshit. Like, we were consultants and we're fine, and much money in that. And then we took time doing this kind of stuff. Like, well, here's the design. A lot of designers don't know how to use this stuff. I don't want to use it. I like to find it. How's that okay? They get you sort of far, but they don't let you do modalities. They don't let you do color bending. They don't let you establish semantic relationships with other things. When you learn that kind of stuff, you then look more confident. It's very technical. I get it. So part of the study, you feel that fun. You're like, no, I don't want to all my buttons, my color, a button, and a stroke, and a icon. That seems like so much label. But ultimately, when we're designing, that's what we're doing, right? We're like making a nav, we're putting all the icons in there, we're changing all their colors, we're showing drop downs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you go back over a system of colors that you can use that are labeled, now you can say, oh, well, now it's just design one. And if I ever need to modify it, have a different brand, color, or different modality, you go modify the variable. You go add another variable mode, changes all that stuff, and you just drag. So this is like magic. It's fun. But they don't know. Do not show them how to do this. They do this forever, right? Which we want to like. Maybe I'll show you. Okay. So I work with this company called Better. They work with design systems and design other stuff. This was some pitch work that we did for Icon Path, which is Altera Mountain Company. They run Mammoth and like 17 other areas, and we were pitching to redo their web application that runs across this stuff. And this doesn't have as robust of a design system as this was showing you guys because we were working pretty fast on this thing. But there is these things that you want to show a client that you can do, right? We can design you one unified system that all you have to do is modify the underlying rules and they can apply to 4 different brands. Nobody wants to maintain 7 different brand design systems out. It's just very, very expensive. But if you can show, hey, I can design a system that has range, has modalities, I can now design in one place that scales across the process. That helps you in school, but also helps you say, like, how do you guys manage your multiple brands? Got like 25 designers on it. Madness. So like, well, how about we establish a variable system? Design a design system that unifies it so we all are designing off the source of truth. The source of truth is built into the underlying structure of it. To do that well, it takes a while to learn it. And I realize it. Most of you do that somewhat, but some of it is hard to think. Is that clear? Now, this also, when you are then ultimately forced to make not just one stream, but 75 streams in 2 different states in 4 different brands, you can do that off of one set of assets. That, right? But also, fundamentally, it lets you only think about what you're building. Now I don't have to, I'm like, I don't care that it's clean, right? Like, I know, it's almost like you go back to wireframe again. Like, it can be anything you want. I can establish this style in its variable output. Like, establish it back to its variable to start. I can change it for light mode, dark mode, brand X, brand Y, it doesn't matter. It's fundamentally interchangeable, like, all tied together. You tie it together through variables, that's fundamentally easier. Okay. Yeah. Yes, correct. So that could be done. I'm doing it here, light, dark, inverse. If you had more brands, you could have another, you could also do it as collection. Like I'm doing collection 1, brand 2, brand 3, like really robust design system then translates into code that is managed. And if you can manage it here, what has not been fully fixed yet, which is going to be relatively soon, is the circular economy of stuff we build here that goes out through a CSS web system and then feeds back. Like, oh, that's coming soon. Now, if you establish this kind of stuff, these rules get hard-coded into a lot of storm code rules and stuff. And then you can be like, hey, AI, help me build a nav and rules. And it's like, oh, it already knows. It knows what you've already established the rules. It knows it. And it goes, fine. And if you make recommend, I don't see that. So Figma Make is that Figma Make fundamentally runs on React and Tailwind. So, well, no, but yes, because you can get a Tailwind design system in Figma, but they're just using that because that's the baseline code that's running the AI on. Yeah. So, this set of variable systems is already being written into the code through the your design system. So here you can see that it's writing this into my style. So where Figma has really helped speed up the gap between what is managed in a code base versus what you're designing in Figma is that by establishing variables, you can see that the border variable is that spacing base grid small. So that's where the back the circular economy is not established yet, but working with developers, what we did before, we handed them a style guide sheet, and they went off and they built this stuff, coded the variables, signed it all as a system, and then if we did changes, they would go in and make those changes for people. Now we're saying, let's move that forward. The designers establish the system, the variables are part of the design group. That then has a nesting set of CSS rules with part of your variables, and now you maintain that order.
Is there a way to unmute the variables?
Well, it's not going to interpret it. It's simple. They're dumb. Ultimately, they know, like, they only know what you give them.
I'm not sure.
Right. And then there are people who are proceeding on this for them. A lot of places will say, like, if you go work at a place working on design systems, a lot of times there's questions like, well, what is your baseline code base? Oh, we use React. Oh, okay. Well, React has a set of libraries predefined. And you say, well, how are you standing up your front end to React? And they're like, oh, that's a customized front end. You're like, so Figma. They're like, yeah. I'm like, are you using are you using storybooks to sort of maintain your source of truth? So code output. This kind of variable-like system are much faster for thinking with those two. And you then look confident when you ask, well, how did you design this work? Oh, it's Figma. No, not about Figma. Figma is a tool, but it's not the end all, right? You can do variables in framers, you can do variables in webflow, you can do variables in Claude, in V0, like all of it is sort of the root of designing for your web generally. Building them in Figma really speaks to us. It helps you establish this stuff is meaningful, it's later, and then you can say that's the faster translatable in the code. That's 45. Everybody get a card that they can transfer between? Successful? Yeah, no? But sort of? My goal is, if you could drag a card between three states and something changes automatically. Yeah, there you go. That's what I want. Now, this takes some practice, right? It's not just like a simple card. There you go. But there is a sort of like simple magic, right? Now go experiment. Like, what if you make the text change? What if you make the sizing of the card change? What if you make the I mean, you can have to do things like the icon flips out. It's like all this nuance that you really get sophisticated with, which makes using that card more fun, but also you're not saying, now I had to, like in the past, you had to design 3 different cards and maintain 3 different instances of that card that had 3 different states. It all compounded really quickly. You still have to manage a lot of stuff variables, but the ultimate value of it is that you sort of relatively closing it in, simplifying its rules, and then applying that to larger sets of stuff.
I'm just living the content in the beginning of this so hard to do that. I mean, there's not that time. So we're just having, the color side overall.
Yeah.
Very needy.
So ultimately, these colors can be anything they want to be, right? So it sort of doesn't matter. Like I start with this as grayscale. Establish my roots. I build wireframes that are fundamentally the baseline. And then as my system gets more sophisticated, I'm adding that sophistication into my variables. So I'm like, oh, yeah, I have this grayscale that I was using. If I need to copy that and make it a button or whatever that is. And one of the challenges with color is that I don't really know how to use it. Right? I don't know if it looks good as a button, as a swatch. I gotta build a button. I have to apply that button onto a card. I have to see how that works back and forth. That still is doable, but it's a little bit more scalable And a lot of times it's like, this is generally what I sort of find really frustrating about Figma, is that it's not a great stepping tool. Not really that good for sort of noodling with a Figma and figuring out. Really good at systemizing it. It wants to systemize everything. So therefore, sort of utilize it for its opportunity scaling this stuff, and if you need to sort of navigate what it looks like, you see the tool of that. It doesn't matter. You can use Figma, but have a file that's like, this is my noodling space, and here's the stuff that's different. This is why typically you see teams at work, they have a design file, a design system file, and then the system they're working on. And then they have to apply their stuff back into it. Most of these are order places. I have to make recommendations to the design system and have a set of features. And if it utilizes some of the design system, then they'll say, yeah, we're going to support that new feature. Now for us, this way of the execution is more and more specific. And that's the stuff that we as designers want to be able to own and use. And the client will be like, oh, I want to bring it's the color, that color is the button, right? If the button is used, this is all specification that we know how to add into the system. Adding it in here is fundamentally key to that. Okay. No. I mean, the other thing that's sort of challenging is that Figma's cool, it's great, but it's just a tool, right? You are not how you execute like this stuff is fundamentally what you just specify. It doesn't matter if it's in Figma or not. Utilizing Figma effectively and efficiently is going to keep you up. And most of you have to design pretty sophisticated systems, even though they're not real, right? Like, oh, I'm not branch class, maybe you learn Figma. Like, I don't have to be paid for this, like it's really sophisticated. And you don't want to have to design all that stuff. Or you do, but you don't want to have to, like, you don't want to be up at 4 a.m, like, changing a million buttons to the right color. What works right, right? You want to be able to say, I've established the rules, I can then scale that or range it out, and then being able to sort of bring stuff up and say, look how this works. What does it look like if it's on a really dark background? Or what does it look like if it's used on a, I don't know, whatever, we know we do that stuff, we're working all the time. But scaling it here then makes you say, oh, well, now I can navigate or play with it more meaningfully, right? Sort of execute it. And then lock it in. So establishing a variable system fundamentally establishes that you're not going to. Any questions? I teach a business one, and with a business term, and I also teach a web technology course, where we teach it. I don't know, at some level, web tech is like up in there with it's showing you how to apply Figma into Webflow at the moment. It's what it's at the moment. Pretty good. But even like in 6 months, like Webflow could be gone. I'm serious. Like you put these tools, like so, in the AI world is so much more frustrating. So at some level, experimenting with how to take your design your web thinking skills in design and apply them into making real stuff. So that could be Figma Maze, that could be broad. Let's go make it MCC. That's my dream. It's like let's go make a class like all feed into an MCC server that learns from the students for each experiment work test and then sends out. And for that. Hey, did you play around with AI? Like Claude and run in the background? Like, there's also something that can speed this stuff up because fundamentally you can there's some tools for importing. You do like a grab design system variable library and say, hey, apply this into Figma, and it'll like do it for you. But again, if you don't know why you're building a semantic library and you go copy somebody else's library, now you're living in their rules. You have to understand how they have designed that design system. And it can be useful, but it also can be quite frustrating. Like, wait, how are they applying that? Now that's where you have to go and you work anywhere. You go work at Apple or IBM or any big software organization, like has an established design system, and you will have to learn how to apply that stuff. The irony of like, oh, you got to learn how to make a button, and then you'll never have to make a button again. It's not lost on you. But if you don't know how to make a good button, no one's going to trust you to use their design system to execute the. And there's lots of places who still haven't applied variables to their design system. Like, that's hard. You're like, yeah. But we're going to more quickly. So, 15 minutes left. That's a fun. That's a double. You're complaining or something. For a few hours. For a few hours. Now, hopefully what you sort of understood, and I'm going to do a little recap. Out of the design system, sorry, this is out of source mode. In design mode. So part of the value, right, is your design systems are living, breathing documents, right? They build out a system larger. You do not have to start your design system as this robust, multi-moded thing, right? But if you sort of say, oh, I want to build our systems so they can grow, the opportunity there, like we were saying before, is establish your primitive. All my root units, stuff that I'm going to use, existing, so I'm going to establish it as output. I then can make semantic tokens which grow over time. So there's semantic tokens allow you to build that system. And you can these can always be added to, right? So my colors don't change because they're defined, but I can establish things in typography. Do I show you this last thing? Does anybody want to know how to make a typography design system using strings? Yeah. So it's and. Right now, most of you probably know how to make type style, right? You make you do a type in style. And I'm going to show you that this is established here in my type style. I have H1 through H4, which establishes over here, right? And I have it as, I'm going to show you this other one. This is an H2. It's part of a type style, right? I've linked by like my H1 through H6 as style. Does anybody know how to do that, or has ever done that? Need help making a style? No. I'm just going to, let's say I want to have, I'm going to unsync this. Let's say I want to, well, I'm going to make an annoying typeface. Notable. Type tool. Let's do it with Pacifica. Right. New. So let's say I wanted to use this typeface as a new asset in my design system, right? One way to do that is that you establish this as a style, and you do that with apply styles, and you can add a new type style. So this is a piece of type, and I can call this Pacifico. So that's the typeface, and I'm going to call this H1. Okay, so that's how you would establish a type style. You can do this for H1 through H6, all done through style, right? But generally, that's not managed through variables. I can also establish this typeface as a string in a variable and then tie that string into this unit. Does that make sense? I'm gonna show you how to do it. So in variables, I have my typography variable, and I have here Ortega design, and I'm going to add a new one in my font family. So I've established a font / family as a unit, and now I'm going to create a new variable. And this is going to be a string. And I'm going to put this in font. Font _ family. Okay. So now I have a font family. I'm going to create a new variable. Right. This is a new string. And this string is going to be labeled Pacifico. And my string value is also going to be the font family name, Pacifico. Okay. So now that I've established this as a variable string, in my type style, if I come back to my type style, here, I can now update this type style to utilize a variable. Do this little apply variable thing, and I can apply a variable, and I can apply it back to the thing that it's called, Pacifico. Does this make sense? So fundamentally, I'm giving it the same label that it is in the type execution, but I'm establishing it as a variable instead. And so now that variable is tied to my design. Does that make sense? See this little thing of like where stuff hides? This is the stuff that drives me a little crazy about Figma. But like, oh wait, I had to establish. So like, I'm going to show you this one. It's like I'm on here. I'm like, do I want to make it part of my design system here? Or do I want to tie it to a string? I'm going to tie this thing back to a string that I've also called Pacifico. And because and this is an important thing, if you are going to use strings to tie it to your typeface system, it has to be the same label and the same so if your typeface is named Pacifico, with the label that makes sense? Now, one of the things, and what you'll notice is that this is no longer tied to the type styles of your thing. It's tied to my font family Pacifico in my label. That's clear. And then this, as a sizing thing, could also be tied back to your type sizes. So I have my type size, and I want this to be H1. So now my little type unit, allowing me to establish the rules of the type, is no longer just using the typeset rule, it's usually my That's it. Where this is quite useful is that if I ever have to change the type, I just go to the word. I don't have to change. I don't have to go in. But this is where where variables get established. They're not all consistent in the UI. They're at the bottom, the UI, and the corner of the variable. Sometimes they're through the unit that we're trying to. So that little UI element works around the Figma in slightly different ways.
When you put host center to the same thing?
So technically, yes. Except that you're not established a type style in Figma, it's not establishing it as a variable string. So now that you've done it this way, I've now established a variable set called font family Pacifico, which is labeling that element back to a variable library. Correct.
And the thing is, you only use that for its size, versus your
There's an argument to have apply both styles and variables. Your styles are your root, your variables are your different text. So I recommend just leaning into variables. The variables are more effectively tiable back to code and to building out its own. You can't have modalities and styles. You can't have styles are system wide, but they're not pliable to a ring, and they're not made to rules. So like I'm driving a car between states. Like now I can establish the color ranges. Oh, I want light to be type A, dark to be type B, etc. You can do that with color. Does that make sense? There we go. So you gotta do that. So because my type, I'm going to come back here and just tie this. If I tie this piece of type back to that Pacifico, it's kind of annoying, but it's here. I've now tied that to its H1. Yeah. Pacifico H1. I see right here, this as a unit is tied to this thing in the output. In my variables, I can now do this in my type. My font family can also have modalities, and I can have this have light, dark, and invert. Okay. And now I can say, well, maybe at dark, I want it to be font family heading. And here I would want it to be just making sense. So similarly, your typography can have semantic outputs. You can say, I want my type to be text color typography. So just making sense. It's not any different, you're just establishing the rules, but because you have established them back to a semantic set of variables, now I can have those things. Pretty fun, huh? Yeah. Thank you for 2 hours is my delay. Time flashing around on a system making variables. Business is active. And what's also sort of nice about mobile, they're not, it doesn't like make it permanent. But what you do want to make sure you're doing is that you're anything you design, make card, anything, it all needs to be tied, all the things that need to be systematic are tied to actually a variable. You don't, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So technically, yes. But you have to establish those as, this is where the variable system becomes more useful because the type style, that is like that's part of a font, right? Like you have a font and then the Alex is a word you say. Clearly check it and the font is Alex. Usually then you establish that as variable. So you have a variable that's italic, a variable that's bold, or a variable that's all text, right? Yes, you can do that with your style, but now you can say, oh, I can change that out with my head. But it adds more. We have like specific or italic. And if you can do that as a net, you can net that in your or I have my typical and my italic bold. Like H1 that are all italic, and H1 is all bold, H1 is all medium or whatever. Type systems get equally complex. Start with your color, that's an easier, relatively easier way to establish a color system. Then do it to typography. Typography is still, you can see that it gets a lot more complex to tie your variables to your typography. And that tying typography variables with strings was launched like 3 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was like some brand when I became like looking, I'm like, oh cool, they look at these variables. And I'm like, then I thought they did it. I'm like, well, that's good. That's more complicated. Huh. All right. So much. It's very inside the type style, then inside the variable. Right. There's a level of abstraction there that starts to make these complicated. And this is where you just have to practice with this stuff. Because if you're not, you just sort of forget that it's there, you roll it. But there's no ton of documentation. In my deck, I have a bunch of resources at the end for just like how to organize the variables. I'm mostly utilizing Joey Banks' stuff. Do you guys know Joey Banks? Great designer. He's actually sort of responsible for Apple committing to moving away from Sketch into Figma. Actually sort of funny. He built a bunch of design tools that copied Apple in Figma. And then it turned out that Apple users, people who went to Apple, were utilizing his stuff, even though they were forced to use Sketch. And then Figma was like, or Apple was like, fine for you. But yeah, you keep reading up on this stuff. There's lots of changing in it. And as you get more familiar with it, that's where you're going to do more advanced stuff. Like, oh, I want to use a plugin for advanced variable labeling. You can do batch labeling and stuff. Where but I didn't want to show you that. Cool. I don't know why. Your question? Yeah. All right. Saturday.
Yeah.
Um, hello.